Hello, everyone, and welcome to a casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. Sorry for talking for a very long time while my microphone was muted. And welcome to the first of 4 preview streams for the Corsairs of Umbar expansion pack. We'll be going through all of the landscape from King's Gondor, at least the western portions of it that have not been made available yet. We'll be hitting Outer Gondor, we'll be hitting the Shield Isles, and we'll be going to the Cape of Umbar and the city of Umbar itself over the course of the next 4 weeks. For this stream, we're focusing on the western half of King's Gondor. In Update 36, we introduced the eastern half of King's Gondor, basically all the way up to Linhir, which is where my character is right now and where we're going to kind of start our walkthrough. And it will carry us all the way through to the west, ending in Dole Amroth. From where you'll be able to see some of the new landscapes that are being introduced in Outer Gondor, Onfalos and Penithgelen. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this stream, this is a world design focused stream. So in this, I hang out and talk with everyone about what goes into building the landscapes of Middle-earth. I do not have experience building all of Middle-earth because we all kind of divvy up our time, but I've worked on a good amount of it, including a large portion of what we're going to be seeing over the next 4 weeks. This is always a team effort, so myself and our other world designers have been working very hard. Basically, since we finished working on Before the Shadow, to bring all of this landscape to life, starting with what we did in Eastern King's Gondor, and then just kind of working our way west, and now heading south. The biggest changes being, heading south from here, going into the Shield Isles and Umbar, brand new biomes to experience. But let's get things started here with our adventure. Oh, that's a bit too fast. Our adventure through Linhir, the streets of Linhir, ending up in Dor in Ernal. So when players were introduced to this area in Update 38 or 36, they kind of ran into the gates that were blocking passage further to the west. And as part of this update, Update 38, those gates have been pulled down. There are also some additional impassables, particularly, don't mind my very prototypey map, north of Malberth and near Ost-Anglabed, where we had an impassable line going along here. Those are all pulled down as part of this expansion pack as well. So before I head into here, we'll get a quick view here. I'll go through and see what we have for some questions. Also, another thing to remind folks, I sometimes forget to have a drink while I am hanging out with you all. So if you haven't seen me have a drink in a while, please, in chat, remind me to take a drink. I've got some seltzer water, I've got some ginger ale, so I'll be all good for the remainder of the stream. All right, so let's see if there are any quick questions before I dive into Dor and Ernal. Let's see. All right. So Druid's Fire says, I think I have a tiny concern. Will it leave a goodly amount of landscape unspoiled for players to discover for themselves when it goes live? So in Dor and Ernal, in most parts of Western King's Gondor, we've done very similar to what we had done in Eastern King's Gondor. We expanded the amount of playable landscape, pulling down the impassables where it made sense, and actually introduced a whole new area to the Cape of Belfalis, called the Mountains of Belfalis, which we'll do a run through as we're progressing through here. Very similar to what we've seen in King's Gondor East. We're bringing in some of our newer, better-looking rocks, trying to build efficiently, but also make the terrain feel like it's, got a little bit more detail to it. One thing to note too, this is an in-development build, so there are some aspects of it that are not complete yet. One of the things that we're still working on is getting some of our rocks into our far view look here. So there you can see them a little bit closer, but there are some of the newer rocks that we've placed out in the distance that don't have quite the same level of visibility that we want. So we want to be able to expand out how far you can see those details on the terrain, and they just kind of help flesh things out a little bit. One of the things that I really enjoyed seeing feedback from King's Gondor um, East was, going through areas that had previously been very, very um, oppressive, with the Dawnless Day happening on them and making it very hard to see what's going on. So now we're in these spaces. They're brighter. They're happier. I mean, maybe not entirely happier, but they are in a better place now than they were when the war was happening. Um, and one of the things that often came up with King's Gondor East, and I suspect it will happen here too, is the sense that we've made things substantially bigger, which isn't the case. It's just we've changed the day file here, which really changes how close in it feels. With the original Gondor, the darker lighting, the darker setting. At least I believe Doran Ernal had some of this going on. Once we progress further west, it won't be as dark, and it'll be more what you'd expect. But in these areas that we've been, where the war was happening, they were much darker and made it feel like it was smaller. And now you can kind of look around and see how things are more expansive. Um, So Tali Rion says, and again, I'm sorry if I butcher anyone's names. Is there any specific reason that there is a wall of death when swimming south from Lynn here, while we get a forbidden area message and a port to the start area in regular Gondor? I think there are some aspects where that wall of death will happen, because you're going out into the ocean. Either way, you'll still get sent back to a defeat location. Um, I think we have employed the Wall of Death as a way to, with absolute certainty, make sure that an area is not accessible by players, um, which is not always something that a like unexplored territory thing is a great solution for, especially if people can like find ways to bounce in and out of it. Whereas a wall of death is very much a like, that's it, you're not going any further kind of experience. We don't like having hard walls within the interiors of spaces that we've built, but we do need ways to make sure that the exterior edges, people can't go beyond them, because those that at that point it reaches undeveloped spaces. Um, all right. Frankish Duck says, "Will areas like Umbar have more of a desert biome?" So we'll go into more details about that when we actually get to the Umbar settings. But it was really important for us to make something brand new. A lot of Shield Isles and Umbar, there's a lot of Mediterranean inspiration there. There is a lot of North African inspiration, and there's a lot of kind of Western, Southwestern Asian inspiration as far as what we're doing with our biomes. We spent a lot of time kind of looking through different, photograph albums and documentaries and whatnot about those areas, and just like Google searching the kinds of looks and feels that we wanted to bring into those spaces. So Dan the Man asks, how does the landscape size and scale compared to previous expansions? This certainly is one of the largest bits of landscape we've added. There are going to be, effectively 4 regions being added: King's Gondor, Outer Gondor, Shield Isles, and Cape of Umbar and Umbar, the city of Umbar. The city of Umbar itself is very massive. I don't want to speak too specifically about it right now, just because we are going to be doing a preview stream of it coming up in a couple of weeks, so I don't want to spoil things too much, but this is a substantial addition. We do have some benefits in regards to King's Gondor East or King's Gondor West, where the height map in the landscape is by and large built already. We don't have as much to produce, so that gives us a little bit of savings, at least in terms of our construction of these spaces, not necessarily in terms of the content that's populating it, but in terms of the construction, we do have a little bit of savings here and there by being able to leverage what has already been built. Let's see. So Squirrel says, now that we have giant cave claws, will we have cave parrots? I would say there are certain birds of a certain size that you can expect to see in certain areas other than what I'm previewing right now. Let's see. So we're heading north. So we're going through Dor and Ernle now, which I love. There's one shot that I took for loading screens up near Ethring that was like looking down the valley, or is Ethering's this way, looking down the valley, and it feels like I'm gonna have a rainy day. This is not good for a preview stream. But yeah, taking the shot of near Ethring down the valley, looking out over Dor and Ernle, just like it's a great view. Kind of the fog just kind of trails off into the distance. Let's see. Above Manwee says, funny, a couple years ago I made a forum post wanting for a non-dawnless day Gondor, since Dor and Ernle looks amazing without it, and I got my wish. Thank you. Green Tea says, have you updated or enhanced any parts of Old Gondor graphically for the expansion, and if so, would those changes be applied to old areas? So, much like with King's Gondor East, the changes that we're making here in King's Gondor West are not being backported, simply because there's just so much on our plates. We don't have the time to do that work and to make sure that the work we would have to do to ensure that things like content placement and whatnot are not disrupted is just not viable for us to do with this update. It's not to say that we won't do it at some point in the future, perhaps, but for the release of the expansion pack, King's Gondor and regular Gondor are going to be different from each other. Let's see. Gingin asks, could you show on the map where the Isles and Umbar will be? I don't believe we've updated the map panel map. We might be able to see. So a year or so ago, or a couple years ago, we expanded the travel map. So the plan is that we'll have, this is the Cape of Umbar down here, and we'll have the Shield Isles kind of out in the water, somewhere around here, I think. That might mean that the King's Gondor bump out, we'll certainly have to move. Stars and Rangers says, oh yay, the lighthouse, so glad it's getting fixed up. I think one of the interesting things about the western half of King's Gondor is, unlike the eastern half, which was where the majority of the war was happening, there are a couple of spots here and there, but for the most part, this section of Gondor was relatively untouched as far as the battles go. There were invading forces, but nothing that really sought to sack and ruin towns. Dole Amroth being kind of the exception, it being under attack by Corsairs, no longer at this point, but let's go. Yeah, it might be a cloudy day here. The kind of weather we get when it's when it's stream time. I should have a way to fix this. I know I have a way to fix this. I just am never prepared to fix it. Wakula says, speaking of already made land and height maps, how much of the original Mio land was reused, tweaked when stitching over Lotro development? So the original Middle-earth Online map was basically covered all of Eriador, but in a very simplistic and mostly procedural way. Nothing super high detail, or at least done to what we would consider appropriate for modern standards, for our standards. So the nice thing about that, though, is it did kind of give us a framework to work off of, a scale to work off of when we were building Lord of the Rings Online. It was a truncated scale, but it was still a scale that we were able to work in. So the idea being that, you know, we could go back and do kind of height map archaeology and see everything that we meet, you know, everything that could be in a place. Like the South Farthing, for example. There could still exist teleport locations and, you know, vague footprints of where a town would be, where roads are. Those still exist in the height map because we've never, you know, removed them. But they're not at a point, they're not in a level of sufficient development that we would be like, and now it's like easy that we can open up and no problem. Because that's just not, you know, not the level of detail that we want. It's not the level of completedness and finishedness that we want. All right, let's see. Stars and Rangers says, "How about some water for you?" Thank you for the reminder. I just took some. Do love my flavored seltzers. It's better than me drinking soda all the time. I say that having a ginger ale right next to me too. Norbert 419 says, "Was there a new challenge regarding building the land which you didn't have until now? Is there anything?" So I would say for this expansion pack in general, the challenge was and is building Umbar and building the Shield Isles, because they're types of terrains and environments that we've never built before. You know, most of what Lord of the Rings is very European influenced. You know, the construction of things, the geography of things, like it's something that is very, you know, European centric. And where we're going now, the things that we want to be influenced by geographically are in other parts of the world for these spaces. You know, places, which means that there are types of trees and bushes and grasses, flowers, other plants like that, types of rock formations and whatnot that we just didn't have before, and we needed to find ways to introduce those assets into our library. Let's see. Going down through some questions. Shmoo says, "Will we get new enemy animal mobs apart from the used ones so far?" So there are a substantial number of new creature types, as well as, or not necessarily new creature types, but variants on existing creature types. So that they should have a good new look and feel to them that are coming as part of the expansion pack. You know, outside of landscape, that was another area that we really wanted to spend some money on, is bringing in, you know, some fresh looks to old favorites, as well as a few new types of creatures to kind of round things out. Gondor and King's Gondor and Outer Gondor are a little bit more familiar. It's when we start moving to the south across the ocean. That's when the bestiary starts to wild up a little bit more. Will there be certain graphical improvements when the expansion comes back or comes out? There aren't any really specific graphical improvements that are coming as part of it. There are some new tools and functionality that we've introduced to help us better handle and manage things like terrain types. Some of you may have seen the purple far terrain stuff that's been going on live right now. That's an unfortunate halo effect of the new stuff that's coming out, and we hope to have that resolved as part of the update 38 expansion pack release as well. The biggest issue was trying to figure out how to fix it and why, like, I could fix it in my tools, but certain other tools were unfixing it and that sort of thing. So we're working on resolving that. But as far as other new graphics features and whatnot, there's really not a ton, at least not anything that my team specifically is taking advantage of. I know there's been some work that's being done on how shadows and lighting work, but I don't think it's going to be something that is as revolutionary a change as, you know, even the change in per pixel lighting from a couple years ago was for Lord of the Rings. So now we've stepped out into Lamadon. So this is not a Dawnless Day area, but this is an area that has seen some growth in it. The valley is a little bit wider, the slopes are more accessible. So you'll be able to get into here and see a little bit more of a familiar space. Okay, and the server's hanging, so we'll wait here for a second. I'll answer some more questions while the server finishes hanging for a little bit. So Nenrest says, what in particular have you guys been influenced by for Umbar and the Shield Isles? North Africa? Like I mentioned before, we're leaning towards Mediterranean and North African plants and fauna and whatnot for Umbar, and even some from a little bit further east as well. We wanted to have a more arid tropical vibe to things, particularly once we start pushing inland and start hitting deserts. We needed less lush deciduousness and more stuff that can live in those dry and arid lands. Ismailiel says, how are we going to be traveling between the Isles and the mainland? Will it be swift boat like Evendon? Yes, that is our current plan. Currently in our test realms, we do not have anything set up for that kind of travel, but one of my efforts, probably within the next couple of weeks, will be to set up a travel network system using the boats. So we'll have dock masters kind of connecting places like Dole Amroth and Dole Amroth, maybe Lynn here, and the places in, I think there's going to be one in Outer Gondor I want to connect to, as well as a handful in the Shield Isles and Umbar. Shmoo says, I hope we get giant snakes. I don't think we have giant snakes on tap for this. We do have a bunch of new snake critter appearances, which may then also eventually become snake cosmetic pet appearances for people. Crocodiles, anyone? Not to spoil too much, but that is a creature type that we are working to bring into things. We do have, you know, a lot of our art requesting for the expansion pack, excuse me, was not made specifically for the expansion pack. There's a lot of stuff that we were requesting with the intention of future use as we expand to the east from Umbar, heading into Harad and whatnot. And we have a lot of outstanding art requests too that are things that we wanted for those areas beyond, but just in terms of the timeline, it didn't make sense to try to push for them. Yao Deco Dumiyu says, so how many new deco items planned for 38 billions? So actually, I probably won't have enough time in my schedule to produce a ton of deco items like I had in previous updates. That bomb may come as part of a later update, maybe around Christmas time or in January at some point. I know there will be a bunch of housing items made available, but there will probably not be the volume that I've done anyways when I've introduced things like Erebor housing and Lindleby and whatnot. Mostly because I've got a lot of work to do still, and the whole team has a lot of work to do, and it'll probably be better and safer for us to not try to also push to get all of that sort of stuff in. So one of the things you may notice too, as we're wandering around in here, is King's Gondor West has far more stable masters than the original version of Gondor did. And some of this stems from my own playthroughs of Gondor, and being somewhat frustrated that we have all of these towns kind of scattered around, and very often you end up running around and feeling like the towns aren't connected. Each area has one stable, even though that area may have 3 towns associated with it. So here we are up in Tarlong's Neck. Some of you may have been familiar with this area before, where it was much, much more hemmed in, much more in a valley. This area is now kind of spread out and in a kind of more of a shallow valley with more open space in it. We'll run up the hill here. I think before this was a little bit more hemmed in than it is now. Working our way up into Blackroot Vale and down and over. I'm liking how the fog here feels like it's settling into the trees. I wish at some point we could get like real, actual volumetric fog, but I'm not sure. Not sure when or if we'll be able to do that. Dan the Man says, any plans on bringing stable hooks or ambient lights to Dole Amroth premium housing? So if you're talking about the Belfalas housing neighborhood, so ambient lights is certainly on my to-do list, and pitching posts would be a fairly easy thing to implement as well. Again, it's a case of like, how much time do I really have to do all of these things that are on my plate. I would really like to also bring in cosmetic fencing and whatnot to Belfalas and to the other premium neighborhoods. The problem is those areas weren't built at the same scale. Like, the fences aren't built at the same scale. So I would have to like rip out all the fences and put in new fences in order to make it all work, which is a substantial amount of work. Squirrel says, no Paths of the Dead post-war, I assume. From as far as I'm aware, the access to the Paths of the Dead will be closed at least for the launch of this. There may be a point in the future where something is done in there, but for this version of King's Gondor, the Paths of the Dead are closed. Norbert says, speaking of slopes, I would like to have a White Mountains region. Well, we're kind of in that area. It's a little tricky to build something like that without it feeling too much like the Misty Mountains and whatnot as well. I think that there's certainly in the areas all around here, there is opportunity for filling in the gaps style landscapes. Um, it's just a matter of finding the time and the niche that those things will fill in. I've already got my eyes set on what I want to do for the next filling in the gaps, um, and I'm hoping I can get time to do it over the next few months. But I've got my eyes set, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Talrion says, "Is the floating window in the Shire still an issue?" So that is something that personally I have never been able to reproduce. I've seen reports of it. I've gone into tools. I've gone into client and have tried to reproduce it, and I just cannot, for the life of me, figure out what's going on there. So I have not done anything specifically to fix it, and I have not been able to reproduce it. So that's one of those tricky things where it's just like I'm not sure what to do and how to make it, how to resolve that one particular thing. Um, Ryan1562 says, any idea roughly when this will be out? So it's not my place to state when release is going to happen. I would encourage you to pay attention to the message boards and any of our official social media for an announcement on a release date. Once we have a release date noted in the wild, I will happily talk about that release date. But for right now, since we don't really have any official announcement for it, I am not personally comfortable with making any statements as far as when this is going to be released. It will be released soon, but as to when, please wait for an official announcement. Wukula says, what references do you use when creating lands locations that don't or barely exist in Tolkien's writing? I can see some resemblance to MERP maps and modules, i.e. the Peligir map, but are there other materials that you use to suggest where you should go? So we certainly take a look at other pieces of media to see where we can find inspiration for what we want to do ourselves. I know that there are times where our designers kind of look in curiosity at what things like MERP have done for certain locations, as well as looking through just the other source materials that we don't have the licenses for, but are still good to use to inform us, so that we are not doing anything that is contradicting necessarily what is in official lore. So there's a lot of that. There's also just some like creative extrapolation that occurs as part of building out something like this. You know, we may not have all of the information for a space, but we might have enough to suggest what might be going on, what kinds of cultures might be there, you know, those sorts of things, so we can kind of use our creative license to expand, to expand on what the world could be. Vanek says, will the landscape and color palette for Outer Gondor look the same as King's Gondor, or is it going to look quite different? So there is going to be a bit of a different color palette. I think King's Gondor is a little bit of a quintessential like gray rock, green lush landscape kind of thing. Anfalos, which we'll talk more about next week, but Anfalos leans more towards like arid Mediterranean coastal, gray arid Mediterranean coastal with some like cool wind-writhen trees and scrub and whatnot. And then Penethgalen is the breadbasket. Basically, it is much more shirey in appearance than pretty much anywhere else in Gondor, maybe with the exception of Lossark. Old Benny says, any new enormous housing items? I was thoroughly impressed with the enormous basalt basins from Gundabad. I'm not sure what the current rewards plans for housing items are. Usually there are, when it comes to developing housing rewards, there are usually two kind of separate tracks of implementation that happen. There's our game systems designers who generate the rewards based off of things like, rep systems and whatnot. And they usually get their first say on what they want to use and whatnot. And then I do my pass and basically fill in everything else. And it all depends on like what what we have available for assets and whatnot. One of the things I have requested in the future going forward is if we are making any assets that are going to be unique for housing in some way, so they're not something that's like an existing asset that we've taken and incorporated into the housing system, but there's something something wholly new. That we try to lean towards those being space filling decorations, whether that's larger things for yards or things that you can hook inside your homes that like can more fill a room, something that's a little bit more substantial. Because as nice as a lot of our deco objects are, when you get into the really really tiny ones, like those can be hard to feel like you're using them effectively. So here we are running down through Tarlong's Crown, out of the Blackroot Vale, and you can see here in the background here, what you're looking into is Onphalos. The river and the impassable here are gone, or the river's still here, but the impassable between them is gone. So you can freely, as you're going along this road here, just jump off and head into Onphalos if you so desire. But continuing down this road will take you to the same space that you were familiar with in the past. This will take you eventually down into the havens of Belfalos, past Edelond, and very close to things like Ostalontir and to Dole Amroth. So above Maunwi says, guess you guys feel that the explosion of Mount Doom sort of changed how mountains around Mordor look, or is this your guys' regular version, rather closing in most areas? The expansion. I'm not sure what this question is regarding to. If you can clarify a little bit more, I'll happily answer it later. Dan the Man asks, any whispers or rumors about expanding into Linden down the road, Grey Havens perhaps? At some point down the road, we will probably eventually get there, but that is not something that is on anyone's radar in the near term at all. We are all in on Umbar, so that is the direction that we're going with things for a while now. At least until we conclude the storyline that we're telling there. Are the Gurzul part of the expansion pack? I don't believe the Gurzul are being involved as part of this expansion. We have a whole new set of antagonists that are going to be introduced through the epic story. You've met a couple of them already as part of Update 36. Nanaris says, kind of weird question scenario, but who does the font logo designs for the casual Stroll banners? The art team? I do them. I am the one that creates them for our social media posting and whatnot. Nanaris also says, love Morlad, one of my favorite villages in game. It really feels like a little town in the Alps. Morlad was one of those, like, it's a breath of fresh air space in the original version of Gondor, because you go from before I continue telling the story, this little bridge here, all sorts of repaired so that you can cross over into Onphalos. So Morlad is very much a kind of like breath of fresh air, returning to like quiet civilization experience as you leave the you dealt with Helm's Deep, you've mustered forces, you've made your way through the paths of the dead. Like that's all kind of like harried, aggressive stuff that's going on. And crossing through the paths of the dead into the Blackroot Vale and coming across Morlad is kind of like a, you know, finally civilization kind of feeling. Go down through here. There are a couple of questions that people are asking about what classes to play. And it looks like people are handling those pretty well in chat. Sterminator says, are you able to tell us what the color palette of the shield isles is like? I would say hold those horses and come back in 2 weeks for that preview, and you'll have the answers to your question. We're going to be doing these streams weekly, so you'll be able to see the landscapes that are being introduced. And eventually, too, this will all be going on to Bullroar, so you'll be able to pop in there and see everything as well. So this is a much less harried and frantic version of Edelond. The enemies have moved out, the flowers have moved in, and things are a little bit more peaceful here. Which is nice, because I remember playing through this in the original version and how just, like, everything seemed like it was on fire, and there were Corsairs running around everywhere. So you can see the shoreline of Onphalos there in the distance. Don't worry, we'll be getting there next week. Dole Amroth there, kind of looming in the distance. This day file, even though it's not the dawnless day, it makes the things that are happening in the distance feel ominous. Softsnake GR says, will there be a new Gondor region west of West Gondor? Yeah, and that is Outer Gondor. Outer Gondor will include Onphalos and Penithgelen, each with their own subregions as well. Are you able to tell us the level range of the new regions? So the expansion pack will increase the level range up to 150. So that means that between Lynn here and the city of Umbar, we've got 10 levels of gameplay. Imagine, roughly like 2 to 3 levels per region, because we're going to be effectively introducing 5 new regions. So you'll have King's Gondor West for a couple levels. You'll have Onphalos for a couple levels. You have Penithgelen for a couple levels. You have the Shield Isles for a couple levels, and you have the Cape of Umbar for a couple of levels. That's the general plan. I don't have specifics about what's going on there yet, because I think there's still some tinkering happening behind the scenes as far as what the levels for each areas are going to be and how much XP those places are going to give. Dan the Man asks, why not remove the camps you are passing in King's Gondor? So that's one of the things that we talked about as we were going through, and very similar conversations to the ones we had as we were building King's Gondor East, is what stays, what goes, what's abandoned, what's under construction. So there are a bunch of camps that have changed a bit, have either gone away or have been taken over by animals. Those are the kinds of things that have changed as part of this pass through. The biggest difference, though, between King's Gondor West and King's Gondor East, as I had mentioned, was the western half of it was not as harried and overtaken as the eastern half was. And because of that, a lot of the camps that exist are not, villages that have been overrun. They're, campsites out in the woods. So a lot of those felt like it was still kind of okay to leave them. We also wanted to maintain some aspect of, while the war is over, there's still a presence in this area. There are basically war refugees of the opposing side. There are still Corsairs and Easterlings and Haradrim that are lingering in these areas, and they need to be dealt with. But they're rudderless. They don't have the leadership that they used to have, um, and so they're a bit disorganized. They may be clinging to the places that they had claimed, but not clinging very successfully. Um, So Norbert says, "I see the Corsairs are happy to stay in Tarlong's crown." And to kind of continue that conversation, I wouldn't say it's necessarily that they're happy, but it's more like they don't have anywhere else to go. Their fleet was destroyed. They are kind of hemmed in to the south by Dole Amroth. And so like where else are they going to really go? How are they going to escape? And they're there trying to figure it out, right? Um, Dr. Power Slam says the beacon is lit. That is something that will likely change before the launch. We went through, and with the exception of one beacon in Eastern King's Gondor, all of them had their fires extinguished. And I think we just need to remind ourselves to do that on the way through what we're doing here. So everyone's familiar with Dole Amroth. There's really not much of anything that has changed here. The biggest change is more of a technical change than anything. Is a lot of these flat surfaces, that you see here, and this is something we did in other parts of King's Gondor as well. Previously, were hand-placed platforms, so they were additional entities, and now we've just replaced them with normal height map. Makes things a little bit more efficient and gives us a little bit more flexibility in how they look and how they're painted. Will there be any kind of port from OG West Gondor region to Onfalos? No. So there's not going to be a pre-war Onfalos, at least not in our current plans, because all of our regions are time locked. And the point at which the original Gondor occurs, that bridge is collapsed, and the stories that we do not have a need in our current story, anyways, to go back to original Gondor and expand on those regions, because we've kind of locked in the story there. That's not to say that in the future, say we get to a point where we are needing to do a level 100 or 150 filling in the, or level 100, level 120 filling in the gaps. It's not to say we might not come back in and fill in some things there, but the plan right now is to not worry about that, to not do that. Eidolon looks so much better with flora. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things. You add some flowers, they look better. So to follow up on Above Manwi, from my previous question, I was wondering, with Gondor looking expanded upon, what is the thought behind it? Normally it feels like Lotra landscape is closed a bit more, while this expansion landscapes look more expansive, which is why I was guessing at the reasoning. Okay, so I think, I've talked a little bit before in previous streams about how the game, when it was originally built, was really built as a theme park MMO. The regions were all kind of in these fish bowls with high impassables surrounding all of them, and that was just how MMOs were made. Just that's what MMOs did back in the early 2000s, and that mentality, our design philosophy, has changed a lot over the years as to how we build these spaces. It's not to say that we avoid it completely, but we do now try to be more aware of how we can make a space feel open and expansive while still maintaining boundaries within it. We experimented in places like Eregion and Forkel with low impassables so that you can see planes beyond the playable space, with Swanfleet and Cardelon, we really worked to build, you know, something that was very open and explorable with lots of traversable terrain. And I think that's the mentality we have and the direction that we want to push going forward is these kind of open, explorable spaces that can have a focused content experience through them, but still have room on the sides for players to go out and explore. That's not to say that there aren't going to be areas where geographically it makes sense for it to be more hemmed in and tighter, and having tighter like constraints and controls over things. So stuff like the Wells of Langflood and the Vales of Anduin, which are valleys like following along the Anduin River, with very defined ridge lines and mountain lines on either side, kind of holding them in. But I think when we have the opportunities to build out these spaces in a way that is broader and more expansive, then we want to take advantage of that, and we want to we want to be able to build something that feels like an open and connected world. So we have at this point basically seen everything there is to see, at least in terms of what was the original playable space of Gondor. And now we're going to start working our way into something different. Working our way into a place that was previously inaccessible. And it may be inaccessible here, because I may have taken a wrong turn at Albuquerque. But yes, I have. But let's just rocket jump our way up here. There we go. This is where I need to be. So there are now ways to get, where are we? Gondor. So this is an older version of the map, but previously here in this on the Cape of Belfalas, these mountains were kind of a imposition. They were blocking your way into the havens from places like Dor and Ernal. As part of this expansion pack, we are now opening up the Mountains of Belfalas. This is a fairly substantial landscape area called Emin Falas. Substantial landscape area that introduces some new camps, and there's content that's going into the space, but by and large, it's meant to be more of an explorable area for people. It also offers travel routes through it to more effectively connect places from like Dor and Ernal to the Havens of Belfalas and even up into Blackroot. So let's make our way down here. So Softsnake GR says, would be awesome if you made Edelon the major hub. I think one of the tricky things about making Edelon a hub is we also have Dole Amroth right there, which is also a major hub. Yao asks, is U38 the biggest expansion in terms of landscape? Because at the moment, 4 regions seems like it's going to be huge. Yeah, I think, with Cardaswan, with Swanfleet and Cardelon, last year I was kind of boasting about it being probably the single biggest landscape addition that we've made. And I think those 2 regions stand on their own as fairly large individual regions. But I do think that this is probably one of the biggest amounts of landscape that we'll be introducing. Hey, hello there, quest giver. As part of an expansion pack. Some of it is because, we were able to leverage King's Gondor West as a, simpler addition for us. And kind of allow us to spend the lion's share of our effort on things like the Shield Isles and Umbar. Even Penithgelen, there's not a lot of new assets that are going into it, but there are a lot of new uses and ways of using those assets in those spaces. I love seeing the rockworms. I know a lot of people like the Avank, but for me, like, rockworms are my worms. They're my favorite ones. Nenara says, what region are you most excited for players to see? So, well, I should say I'm most excited for people to see the areas I've worked on. I think I'm gonna say I'm most excited for people to see the city of Umbar. The assets that we've gotten for that are amazing, and it's such a different feel from what we've produced before. Um, so we're really excited about that. Like it's just such a different kind of space. Lost Shire Hobbit says, "What has been the best thing about being able to expand towards Umbar?" I think the biggest thing to take away from it is just that it is a whole cloth new region with new cultures and new assets for us to use, and that's what is the most exciting aspect about it. Where it's just like it is a open space where we can kind of play a little bit more, and we can tell more of our own stories in. Um, how much time is supposed to have gone between Aragorn's wedding and the expansion pack? So the Epic Book One is kind of effectively the prelude to everything that's going on here in the expansion pack. Update 36. Um, I don't want to talk too specifically about it because I don't want to bring too much into play in terms of spoilers. But Update 36 really does pick up like right after the wedding concludes, and you carry that narrative thread um, on through from there with what's coming in Update 38. Will there be more points of interest in West Gondor? It always felt a bit empty between Dole Amroth and Lynn here, besides the lighthouse. I mean, personally, I feel like there's a good amount of stuff in between those two areas because you have Dol Amroth, you have the Watchtowers, you have Ostlin here, you have Tadrent, you've got Callambel, Ethring. There is a good amount in between those spaces. We did not add any new towns or villages um, into any of this, and we didn't add any new structures into existing spaces, though we have added stuff like that here into the mountains where you can see, we were just over at those ruins up in the mountains there. Let's see. There's a port, but there is a port from South Ithilien to North Ithilien that breaks the timeline, so why not the same for West Gondor? In part because we haven't built that, and two, the level jump is pretty egregious. The level jump between 100 and 150. I just don't think that it makes sense for us to put in that kind of teleport, especially when there isn't a similarly leveled counterpart area on the other side of it. Nanara says, is there any ideas on the team to make it more explorer-based content, either in the form of hobby, deeds, or crafting? Would love to have reasons beyond just sightseeing to go to out of the way places and even return to niches in old zones. So I'm going to pause here, answer a few more questions, and then wrap up, continuing with Nanaris's question, and then we'll call it a day, or we'll do a few more and then call it a day. So I think there have certainly been some conversations internally about other hobbies that we could introduce that would kind of leverage more of that explorer gameplay kind of experience. No details beyond just we have ideas and we just need to figure out how doable those ideas are. Ponton Finberry says, will you be able to get Belfless homesteads in King's Gondor, or is that only in Old Gondor? That is only in Old Gondor. We have considered putting the neighborhood gates into the Belfalus neighborhoods from King's Gondor, but there wouldn't be an eloquent way to get back or an elegant way to get back. So right now we're just kind of like leaving it as is. I think the gates are blocked off at the moment. Where there be a capability to get in? Let's see. We'll scroll down. There's more questions. Wakula says, "Who makes new assets that you are getting in-house?" Yes, we have both an embedded artist who works directly with the world team, as well as our art team in general that supplies art needs, or that handles the art needs for both games at SSG. Is it possible to make an option to make frills disappear when they come close to camera? Frills are super annoying while playing with small folks, but removing the frills completely is not something I would like to do. Certainly something we can investigate. I know there are a lot of games that do this sort of thing, so there may be a good case studies that we can reference to kind of do something like that, but no ETA on that. Are there more plans for Tales of Yore? The Fall of Fornost would be awesome. I think eventually we'll get back to Tales of Yore when we have a need or opportunity for it, but it is not something that is on our plate right now. Do you guys have any plans for continuing Floyd and DeWitt? I'm unsure about that as well. That would be up to our content design team if they wanted to bring them back. Will there be a preview of new map zones? I entered a bit late from Riedler. Yes, Riedler. So this is one of the new zones that is being introduced as part of Update 38, the Corsairs of Umbar. Over the next 3 weeks, we'll be doing previews for all of the areas that we're going to be introducing. Next week is Onfalos and Penith Gullen. The week after that will be the Shield Isles, and we'll be wrapping up the series in the Cape of Umbar and City of Umbar itself. And is there a new map to show? The only map that we have right now is a placeholder version of the map. It does not look pretty. And I'm not even sure if it's accessible from where I am right now. So, anyways, thank you everyone for joining me for this stream. Thank you for all of the questions. This was the first of 4, as I mentioned. We'll be back next week to stream Onfalos and Penith Gullen. Whole cloth, new landscapes for us to explore. I'm really excited to show off one of the cities there, because I think, for me anyways, I have not worked specifically in the Shield Isles or in Umbar. So there were a couple of locations in Onfalos in particular that I took as an opportunity for me to kind of stretch my port building legs in comparison to what they're doing in Umbar. So anyways, thank you everyone, and we will see you next week for another casual stroll, this time Onfalos and Penith Gullen. Have a great week. I know there are some events running. Bilbo's birthday, I believe, is supposed to be running. So feel free to hop into game, get your gold rolls on the Hobbit gifts if you're VIP, and have a lot of fun this weekend. And stay tuned to the message boards for official announcements on things like bull roarers, whether or not we're going to be doing more previews for the Mariner class, things like, what else do we have coming up? Announcements for when the release date for this will be. So pay attention to those. Anyways, thank you everyone. Thank you for asking your questions, and have a great afternoon.